Kia ora YouTube, it's Pericles here with week 2 of the WZ-111 marathon grind. I hope you've been enjoying the festivities as much as I have. The weather's actually behaving around this time of year for once, which is a bit of a godsend. I've been trying to make the most out of it while it lasts. Took the dogs out to the beach for a swim on Christmas morning, which was quite nice. And been out and about since then, catching up with friends and whānau. The consequence of this, of course, is that I haven't really been playing quite so much as I would have liked. So, basically just enough to knock out the kill total, 150 kills for Germany. And as I don't really have all that much to talk about this time around, I'm going to be padding out this video with gameplay footage in each of the 4 sections, which is a terrible segue to this first game that I didn't quite have time to fit into the first video. An underappreciated gem of Tier 9, I definitely consider the E50 a keeper tank. This is just a fantastically aggressive, all-round performer, an absolute bully of a tank, and I love it to bits. Having decided that I'd initially be focusing on the Germans, it was the perfect time to finish my grind on the L100 gun, the completely pointless weapon, just to get the tank elated so that crew training works better, especially during the crew training bonus at the moment. And this game served to showcase what this tank's really all about. First things first is the fantastic armour. That Pershing is going to have absolutely no hope against this vehicle. 150mm, the same thickness as the Tiger II, at an absolutely wicked slope. This thing bounces so reliably. It's a contender against Tier 10s, decent against Tier 9s, and Tiers 8 and 7, it's just a bully. There's nothing they can do. Especially when you consider the sheer physicality of this tank. It can throw its weight around like Jonah Lomu in its heyday. The armour and weight makes it a more than capable brawler, a violent thug of a tank. And it's not lacking in the firepower to mount it either. It's got an absolutely ferocious 105mm gun, which, although on the lower end of DPM for Tier 9 mediums, still puts out a respectable amount of damage, and it does so accurately with incredible penetration, allowing it to make short work of even the toughest opponents. It's a tank that punches above its already considerable weight. More than worth grinding through the mediocre Panthers before it. So this was a very enjoyable game. Nice to see the Tier 8s, bottom rung players, pushing aggressively through the centre there. And it had been going pretty flawlessly until this point where I tunnel vision rather horribly, diving straight to the centre of a whole bunch of enemy tanks, instead of opening up a new avenue of attack, which is really what medium play is all about. And it took 2/3 of my health for me to realise this. But better late than never, so communicated with Doc that we're going to have to go around and deal with the 121, nasty Tier 10 Chinese medium tank. Wanted him to take point because he was still fairly healthy there compared to me. And I wanted to build up a little bit of speed because the E50 itself is a weapon. Its mother was a mouse and its father was a V2 rocket. So worth it, I'm not even mad. 770 hit points of damage inflicted on a Tier 10 Chinese medium tank, just through brutal contact. You've got to love it. It always gives you that special feeling to pull off a ram like that. The best I've done is 880, but this was pretty damn close. This game was well played all around, from the bottom to the top of the tier table, and we see here my platoon mate Doc with his constant problem of running out of ammunition. He has auto repair on all his vehicles, but he doesn't like the cost of shells, so he doesn't automatically resupply those, leading to these situations where all he can do for the team is soak up damage for them, and ram not quite as effectively as the E50, as you see. GG, that's all she wrote. Having effectively knocked out the damage mission in the first week with the unstoppable Jägernaut, the focus of week 2 has shifted to, well, kill stealing, effectively. My vehicles of choice have focused on a high rate of fire, possibly lower alpha, but just an ability to squeeze out shots and sneak away people close to death. There was an especial focus on revisiting the VK360-1H I ground through this machine long ago, back when it was still a medium tank. Haven't played it as much since it's become a heavy, but it's still quite a contender. It's a very entertaining vehicle. And for the purposes of this mission, the key component is the fact that it can face Tier 4 vehicles. Nothing dies faster than a T-28 medium tank caught in the open. Similarly, I've been relying on the E-25 with its limited matchmaking and its incredible speed to just get into positions where I can unleash fire and basically kill any of the straggles that I can get my hands on. It's so handy for that, this vehicle, practically Unicum bait, just the ability to be where you need to be. Rounding up my rapid fire squad is, of course, the Tiger as I mentioned in the first video. Got this thing down to a 5.3 second reload, and yeah, it's a sweet spot, that. This thing is a bullet hose. All good vehicles, all reliable, all keepers, and hopefully this little snippet will kind of show why. Progress? Bare minimum, I'm afraid. It's been an utterly hectic week, and all I've really achieved is just doing the bare minimum to get the kill total done for the Germans, and then that's basically it. There was of course the frenzy leading up to the festivities, and then the festivities themselves, all taking their time. Real-world commitments getting in the way of virtual tanks. It's a suffering, I know. Then there was the electronic commitments. Patch 9.5 dropped, and with it came a 5-hour downtime immediately preceding one of my shifts at work, which meant that after the 5 hours of downtime and the time taken to actually do the shift, I had to come home and then download the patch, while worrying that perhaps the cost of the download would blow my bandwidth cap after reinstalling the entire game the previous week, which would have been rather catastrophic for my prospects for the WZ-111 marathon, as you can tell. Luckily I still had some interwebs juice, and I haven't had service screwing up in terms of dropping back to dial-up. There is that silver lining, of course. Beyond this, another time sink was of course preparing the first video of the series, which came out fairly late in the proceedings, and took a lot longer than I expected. I'm really out of practice with making these videos. The icing on top of all of this was, of course, the degradation of service. According to the boffins on the World of Tanks forums, apparently the whale population of the Pacific Ocean got a bit peckish and decided to nibble on the cord, the undersea cable servicing Australia's connection to Singapore, which rerouted a hell of a lot of traffic to the rest of the network, and resulted in some of the most atrocious ping that I have suffered lately, as I will demonstrate in this video right here. Immediately after patch 9.5 dropped, the performance of the network was just that horrid that there was even lag between the countdown timer finishing and the game actually starting, as happens right about now.
Auf geht's!
You can notice it pretty much immediately with the tendency to completely oversteer as the server thinks you're still turning while the client thinks that you've finished. If you take a gander at the top left corner, you'll see that the ping is averaging around 350 to 380 milliseconds, which is bad enough, but the thing that really makes this horrid is that little red dot that shows the amount of packet loss. It spends more time in this game red than it does green. This means that my connection would be more reliable if I decided to send my packets via carrier pigeon to Singapore. Playing this game with a server reticle enabled was an eye-opener, as you will have undoubtedly already seen. The time that it takes for the server to realize that I've moved my turret, it's a glacial age. This sentence doesn't take as long as the server does to catch up. Half the information my client sends to the server doesn't even make it on the first try, and what does through happens 5 times slower than pretty much everyone else. Here you'll see the reticle sticking to the building on the left there. That's not a replay bug, that happened in-game. These are all features of Asia servers' shitty quality compared to other clusters, especially for New Zealanders, where the North American West Coast server has fewer hops and a much lower ping to connect to, an average of 100 milliseconds less, not to mention the quality of service, and yet the North American website for Wargaming still, to this day, is advising New Zealanders to choose the Asia server as their designated server. If you connect to the NA website from a location in New Zealand, you'll receive a message that says that you should be connecting to the Asia server for better performance, better ping, and more appropriate user times. Ping 100 milliseconds less, quality of service featuring much higher packet loss, and the peak user time for the server is at roughly 3 to 4 AM for New Zealanders. That's a personal bugbear of mine. I just really wish they'd stop giving that terrible advice. Anyway, back to the game. This video, the replay, played out a lot smoother than it did in client. When I was actually playing the game, the controls were largely unresponsive, and it felt a lot more like playing a stop-motion animation or a slideshow than, the world of tanks we all know and love. As I was saying before I launched off on a tangent, these are all features of the Asia server, but during the period immediately after the patch, it was all cranked to 11 in terms of horribleness. Luckily, the absolutely shocking state of performance only lasted for a day or two, and it returned to generally shit as opposed to completely abysmal in relatively short order. And although packet loss is still an incredibly frustrating issue that strikes every now and then, it's nowhere near as bad, and the ping is actually a lot better than it's been in a long while. Now I'm going to have to blame my poor performances on near-terminal brain farts and having the reflexes of a sloth with muscular dystrophy. Still, in spite of my electronic disabilities, I'm still managing to dominate this game because, well, Tier 4 is hard, yo. Prior to this game, I'd made the mistake of attempting to take out my T-71 to grind it out. Scouts do not do well with bad ping. I'd tried to play high-tier heavies and tank destroyers, but the gameplay was just that bad that my platoon mate and I ran away and hid at Tier 4, before giving up completely in disgust. Now, as the game draws to a close, I get to experience the unique joy of trying to hit a full-speed Panzer 1C while experiencing 350 millisecond ping and severe packet loss. How do you think it's gonna go? Ooh, the uncertainty. Nope, missed that one. Nail-biting, isn't it? Plucky bugger dodged another one. Nearly had him. You're mine, princess. Well, hey, we got him. Don't act like you weren't impressed. What we can take away from this is if your connection is complete trash, but you still desperately need to play tanks, just drop down to tier 4. Whatever your handicap, you can still tank without tanking your WN8. And now for the main event. Platooned with Infector, top tier heavies, tier 8 game, Lakeville. Stop me if you've heard this one before. We're both rolling the IS-6, the reward tank for last year's marathon mission, and a fantastic tank it is. Driving the IS-6 is so intuitive and easy, it's practically like playing World of Tanks with training wheels. In my opinion, this is probably the best tier 8 premium tank in the game, provided that you play to the tank's strengths. After all, you don't judge the quality of a fish by its ability to climb trees, and in that vein you don't judge the IS-6 by its ability to snipe. I have seen so many newbie players getting it utterly wrong by treating this tank as if it's a long-range specialist, camping their spawn points as if there's an invisible barrier preventing them from getting anywhere on the map, trying desperately to pick off targets at range with a gun that's as accurate as Fox News. No, this tank is a brawler. It is a peerless brawler. That 122mm that we all know and love across so many of the Soviet tanks makes this a brilliant short-range face puncher of a tank. That 390 alpha means that even with the fairly long reload, the DPM on this thing is incredible. That, combined with the excellent mobility of this machine, makes it a great street fighter. And when you're up close in the nitty-gritty of things, the excellently sloped armor, it's just so incredibly troll it can bounce very reliably. The only way you can make the armor bouncier is if you made it out of rubber and strapped a pair of tits to it. Now to the game at hand. I was initially going to take the top road as I did in the last video, but that conga line of allies on the 0 line had me a little bit nervous. I didn't want to get trapped at the top with enemies shooting up at me. So I dropped down to open up another line of attack.
Surprise, motherfucker!
And snapshot an invisible stock Tiger II in the completely trash frontal turret face. The stock turret on the Tiger II is an utter travesty. I'm back in familiar territory now, attempting to side-scrape off the top corner of this church here. I could have tried sweeping around the western side of the church, but in truth the IS-6 lacks the gun depression to really get over the rise down there that well, and our team's complete lack of presence on the lakeside road had me a little nervous about getting shot in the back. I was not looking forward to that at all. This is the point where I get mauled by a bad news bear. The reason the IS-6 benefits from preferential matchmaking is the penetration on the D25 gun at 175mm is underwhelming to say the least. This means that the only point on the front of a YAG-88 that I can actually penetrate is the machine gun port that's being covered by the church, which is why I show my filthy scumbag stripes and switch to gold to penetrate the lower glacis on the YAG-88. I can pin it in the sides, but in order to do that I'd have to be out-turning it while driving uphill, which is not going to happen, and if I tried that to get it to turn to expose its side to my allies, I would be exposing myself to every gun on the enemy force in turn, which would be a waste of a top-tier brawler on nearly full health. So I'm content to sit here side-scraping while I grind down the YAG-88's hit point pool shot by shot. With good sloping, spaced armor, and wide tracks, the sides of an IS-6 can eat a lot of shots. Now that's the anchor of the enemy's defense dead, which means we now have the opportunity to properly brawl with the enemy. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing the current reward tank, the WZ-111. The premium ammo for the WZ-111 is high explosive anti-tank with 250mm of penetration. Heat ammo does not like sloped armor, and the IS-6 is sloped armor with a gun. One that is easily capable of penetrating the side of a WZ-111. Now the Tier 8 Brute Squad gets to push around the church and close in on the enemy, with Infector coming up from the west to close the pincer. We get to go all in and make short work of the last two heavy tanks. Easy as that, the town is ours. But the fight is far, far from over. We've got the town, but the enemy has the central road and will very shortly have the valley completely locked up. But, as I keep hammering on, so what? The Lakeville town is the single most important strategic asset on this entire map. The westernmost valley is a swampy choke point that just bogs down any advance, taking up entirely too much time, and any tank there is incapable of influencing any other part of the map beyond the spawn points. The central lakeside road, although a valuable support site to support the town, is itself absolutely impossible to defend. Stealth is the only defense on that road, and in these closing stages of the game, if you want to influence the fight, you have to fire, and if you fire, you get spotted, and with bugger all cover, it's just a shooting gallery. Then, of course, there's the spawn/cap points themselves. They've got a little bit of cover, but not enough to be meaningful, and with the way that the ground slopes down toward the Lakeville city, it's surprisingly easy to mount an advance on the cap points if the central road isn't held. It all comes back to influencing control of the Lakeville city. So let's see how this plays out. We controlled the city, the enemy controlled the rest of the map. Let's see if we can claw it back to a win. My battered and damaged allies are being sent south to take care of the T-34 capping our base, while myself, on half hit points, I'm heading north to single-handedly deal with the enemy cap, removing the artillery from play so that it can't support the T-34, very important, and also to pin down the E-25 so it can't be a thorn in the side of our team. It's played by a very good player, as is the artillery. In fact, statistically speaking, all the significant enemy vehicles remaining are good players, and our own are not bad, but not amazing players. And it's because of this that the game ends up being as close as it is. Ooh, and you'll note here how easy it was for that E-25 to track me. The constant shots that I received from the Jagdtiger 88 earlier really hammered the hit point pool of my tracks, so that by this point you could pretty much knock them off by giving them an especially stern steer. And things are looking decidedly dicey now. The cap counter is getting worrisomely high. I'm praying for them to reset. I'd be surprised by the number of players out there who would rather lose a game than lose a tank. So I'm taking advantage of the relatively straight road to type words of encouragement to my team. And good on them, they just saved the game with that reset. Now, the enemy's down to a single T-34, but it's a good player, it's a tank with a nasty gun on it, and he's in a pretty good position all things considered. He can sit on cap to force us to act, we're all strung out so he can deal with us one at a time. It's way too easy to throw a game at this stage. As you see, he's already dealt with the T-25, and he's got a much better view range than I do, so I have to close the distance if I don't want to get sniped from complete stealth. I was lucky to bounce that first shot, but I can't trust my armor to hold up against the 120mm gun of the T-34. It shreds through armor, even the sloping on this won't stop it. Not without the tender mercies of RNGesus. As you see here, straight through, I'm now a one-hit for him, and I can't stay at range. He's got the advantage at range, so I have to get in close, get in cover, and use that ungainly hull against him. I tuck him down to keep under his gun and get behind bushes so I can advance in stealth until I'm up close against the house. If I can get that structure between us, I will have him locked down, allowing our S-51 to cap. If the T-34 wants to come after me, it has to expose its weak hull. If it wants to cap, it has to expose its weak hull. If it wants to deal with the S-51 in his cap circle, it has to expose its hull. The only way to win a Mexican standoff is to have more Mexicans than the other guy. And this right here is where I fuck up and lose a Top Gun. I lack trigger discipline. He shot first, I could have then waited and planted a decent shot into the side of his tank, instead of going for that shitty angle. Furthermore, my reload is better than his. I could have stayed there and shot his hull before he reloaded. Instead, I let him get away, and the S51 that decided not to cap makes himself useful and finishes him off. But I'm alive, T-34 is dead, game, set, and match. Well, that was a good result. 11,853 WN8. Ace Tanker, High Caliber, Steel Wall, Spartan, Fire for Effect, Fighter, Shellproof, Duelist, Hand of God, and let's not forget 146,000 credits. Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with that result, eh? Putting out over 5,000 damage, netting over 1,500 base XP, picking up 672 assistance damage, and blocking 2,000 points of damage, not counting what my tracks ate, and once more robbing Infector of a steel wall, this time because he died before he could pick it up. I wouldn't be surprised if he stops platooning with me after this. I definitely class this as a highlight game, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll catch you next week. Later.